Okay, so I'm about to lift the body shell off the Triumph TR4A chassis. There's now enough disassembly and clearance around the engine that I can lift the shell over the top of the engine and gearbox and roll the chassis out from underneath the car. Now to do that, I've come up with this stuff, all the yellow bits, which is a lifting frame. So the lifting frame, the idea was that I wanted to have a ready-made kit of parts, that can live on the shelf somewhere, that when I need it, I can bolt it into the car, well, this car, but also other cars when I get round to them. I can bolt in relatively quickly. This stuff I put in this morning, and start to finish it took me about an hour of putting it in, nipping all the bolts up. So it goes in nice and quickly. I haven't got to do much thinking when I do that. It just goes in. It uses all of the bolt points that are already on the chassis, and I think they are all the same from TR4, TR4A, 5, 250, TR6. You'll fit all those cars. Once it's in, it does a few important things. The first of which is probably the most obvious. It provides the bracing to the body shell during the lift. So yeah, very traditional, the door bracing, and in my case, the extra effort of A and B pillar lines of bracing. But the step beyond that is it's the frame itself that you lift from. So the frame provides, by virtue of these two side plates, the hole at the top of the plate is where I'll lift from. And then on the B pillar line, in this beefy bracket, there's a hole that I will put another shackle through and lift from here. So I'll lift from those 4 points. And that's subtly different to how you ordinarily lift these cars, which is to attach cables and ropes to various points on the body shell. And I think the Triumph book, which is why I'm pointing down here, the Triumph book suggests that you should pick up the bonnet hinge points at the front, and then have a couple of bolt holes here, which I don't have on this shell actually, so I'd have to drill them anyway, which I wouldn't want to do. So you would lift from those 4 points, you'd connect them up to a single point and lift it up. And to me, I'm sure that works perfectly well. People have been lifting these cars in that manner or similar manners using other points for decades with success. But for me, lifting from the very front of the body shell, I mean, even if I give this a gentle lift, I can see things flexing, and it seems an awful long way from the middle of the car to be lifting from the front. And perhaps that if you did that, you're probably setting up a bit of flex, a bit of bending across the length of the car, which I would prefer to avoid, particularly in my case where I've got damaged. There's already a gaping hole in the original arrangement of the car. These body shells don't have a fully welded in transmission tunnel as part of the body shell. So you already have this large opening in the middle of the car. Mine's made much worse again by having the rust damage. And also the fact that, like in many of these cars, that there is a bit of rust damage in the floor as well. So there's quite a lot of loss of strength in the body shell. So I wanted to lift from places that were a bit closer together towards the centre of the car, and not really from the car itself. I wasn't really able to find convenient places to lift from, so I've created that by virtue of the frame itself. And then perhaps the sort of most important point of all, and it lives in the word frame, is the idea of trying to keep any of the forces that arise from lifting the body within the frame itself. The way that works, particularly on the A pillar line, is that these two end plates are bolted through. These are the door hinge locations where there's a lot of inherent strength, and I've bolted that from the end plate through to this L bracket through to the tie and the brace. So from side to side, it's fully connected, end plate to end plate. So that any up and down and left and rights or any lateral forces when you lift it up stay in that assembly of those elements, rather than it troubling the body shell. And the same principle then exists on the B pillar line. So with all that in place, it becomes I can give a bit of probably seems a bit daft, but it's incredibly stiff with all these elements in. Now, why have I put all the holes in, and why is it painted yellow? Well, I'll cover the holes first. Because it's laser cut, it's very easy to put features in like the holes, because the laser cutter doesn't care what it's cutting. It's just following the data file, and it can do these very cleanly. They're absolutely crisp and very, very quickly. So I've put all the holes in, of course, to remove lots of weight. I did do a first set that didn't have any holes in it, and it does weigh a lot. So removing lots of weight by virtue of the holes is a good thing. It does, of course, make it look quite cool as well, so I'm always happy about that. Now, I may also, which was perhaps an afterthought, but I'll use it conveniently. It's also quite useful if I want to add additional braces. I don't have a cross brace, for example. I can put one in, I may still do that, or I may just bolt in some corner braces using those holes. So again, they're quite useful for that. Why is it yellow? It's a health and safety thing. When I had just had the 3D, because I actually put in all the 3D printed versions first, and I was forever hitting them with the elbows and shoulders. So I thought, paint it nice and bright, so I don't miss it. And actually, it's something we used to do on construction sites with temporary works and temporary lifting frames, that they're always brightly coloured. But I think it goes rather well with British Racing Green. All right, so all the bolts holding the body to the chassis are now out, apart from the very front two, which I shall do as the very last two that come out before I try to lift the body off. The handbook says, well, it's a TR4A handbook, it says 27 bolts. I count 25, and I think it's virtue of the fact that this TR4A, maybe it's the US version, this is a group of 3 bolts, not 4. So we're 2 down from the book. So 25 bolts. For clarity, you have the 2 bolts in here, which were the trickiest because they're not captive. So you've got to get a spanner on both ends, and there's not much room to do that. And then you have the single bolt that goes through the wheel well. I haven't done that one. I must undo that one, of course. That'll be the reason the body doesn't come off. And then there are 2 at the back of the floor plate that actually go into the chassis leg. They're pretty easy from the top of from inside the body. And then you have the 2 at the very front of the floor plate. Again, that's sort of right in the corner of the footwell. And then there's a group of 4, the group of 3 that I mentioned on both sides, the 4 and the 3. And then you have one guy that's on this down diagonal member, either side. That was okay. They're not captive, so they're a bit of a pain, but not too bad. And then, well, I'll do it from the top, but there's, well, you can see it there actually. There's one bolt there and one bolt there. So get those two front bolts off, and don't forget the wheel well one. Then we'll put our straps around the lifting frame and see if we can pull the body off. I can already get a bit of daylight on the two rear brackets. I might just go around with a screwdriver, pry bar, and just see if I can make sure it's released. Maybe the thing is stuck fast, given all the grim and grime, but let's have a look. I did have to remove, well, I'm not sure I had to, but I did anyway. I removed the brake line and the fuel line that ran, well, rear of the car to the front on this right hand side as we look at it. Remember, because at some point they cross between the chassis, being clipped to the chassis and going to the body, so that would have probably been a bit of a pain. I could have snipped them, but I was quite keen to get them out as one piece so I can use them as a template later on. I did end up bending them a bit, so that idea's gone out the window. But there you go. And well, I won't go into talking about the chassis yet, but it's not bad. It's not bad at all. I've had a pretty detailed look at it, and well, I'm quite pleased so far. I'm hoping that it's nice. I'm hoping that it's in good nick under all that oil and dirt, which always does a good job of protecting it. Right, last three bolts. Let's get the body off. Okay, this morning should be exciting because I've got shelving turning up, storage. So at the moment I've just been using this area as well as the storage, but of course just putting parts carefully on the floor, which is, you know, okay, but it's getting a bit disorganized. So I've got racking turning up this morning, which the guys are going to fit from JJ Racking, a local supplier, and it's one of these sort of proprietary systems of racking, but I've chosen size that it'll be wide enough that I can put things like, you know, body panels on, and then it's also, I've chosen the spacing of the shelving so that it can fit modules of the plastic boxes, which I quite like using, so that stuff can live in the boxes rather than being out in the opening and collecting dust, which is great. It does mean that I need to quickly this morning, before they turn up, get all this stuff back out so they can put the shelving in, so I can then put all the bits and pieces back on the shelves, which means I've got to push these two back. Right, let's get that done. So that's the wiring harness out the car, and I'll probably get this a bit wrong, but well, just for the sake of memory, starting from the back, the rear lights, the ground that's to the right hand bolt of the fuel tank, and a couple of spays that go to the fuel tank sender unit. The cable then, this lot is running across the top of the gas tank on the underside of the body shell, on the underside of the rear deck lid. It then goes down the side of the car, down into next to the sill under the carpet, and comes up the effectively the A pillar, and then this is obviously the piece that runs behind the fan blower motor along the inside of the bulkhead, and you have the cable that goes through to the positive side of the battery. And then this, well, in summary, I think I've got it on another video in more detail, but it's basically the gauge pack and the center switches, ignition, and then you have the foot flasher unit, and then there's this piece that runs through, you can see where it's been chafing, it runs through the bulkhead and hits the windscreen wiper motor and the brake light switch, I think. And then this runs up through the bulkhead on the right hand side, and it hits the voltage regulator block and the fuse pack. Then this is down onto the generator, in my case, or generator slash, I'm sure in other cars it's or later cars it's the alternator, and then the this hits a, well, this in my case was a horn plus another little voltage stabilizer, then onto the front headlights, and then you come round to, there's another little harness for the front headlights, I think, and then this hits the coil and distributor. I probably missed something, but that's the general bits and pieces. It is fairly straightforward, and again the wiring diagrams are pretty good, but I've just done all that so I don't forget it. I'm sure it will be all wrong when I put the new wiring loom back in. So as a bit of a recap, and well, for completeness really, the last of the disassembly that was needed to lift the body off from where I got the car to at the end of, well, it would have been episode 7, is all of this lot, which starts obviously with removing the 2 doors. This is looking down at the slave cylinder, which stays on, but obviously to drain the clutch fluid, and also to remove the length of hard pipe that runs up to the master cylinder. Remove the tack cable, pull that out. The oil pressure gauge hose, the rather grubby expansion tank, look forward to replacing that. The radiator, of course, which I made rather a mess of. Should probably try to get more of the water out before I pulled it out, but there you go. That came out relatively straightforward. The water was a terrible colour. I hope that's just an indication of the radiator condition, not inside the engine. The full steering shaft length, remove that. The speedo cable from under the gearbox, and then the full carb, and then the full carb and intake assembly. Well, I'm making it look easy there because I've obviously removed all the bolts, which I thought were going to be difficult to take out access-wise, but actually the access is not too bad. The last of the wiring loom that goes down to the starter, the windscreen washer bottle and the hose, the water hard pipe that runs around the back of the engine, that could actually stay in, but I've removed it just to give a bit more clearance to the bulkhead, and also I left in the throttle linkage because mine's rather bent, and so I figure it's going to be easier to remove that once the engine's out of the way. The distributor and the leads, in theory that could stay on, there's enough clearance, but I imagine snagging on a lead, so I removed that as well. The last of the petrol, it's a nice bit of sediment in the bottom of that one. The fuel hard pipe that runs up to the carbs, remove that. I took the rear boot seal off, although there are others I've left on as they're pretty crumbly. I'll remove those along with the paint later on. The clutch and brake cylinders and the pedal box, I was quite keen to see how that looked under there, thinking it was going to be very rusty, but it's not actually too bad, thankfully. The windscreen wiper motor and the cable, and then there's removing a little voltage, I think it's a voltage junction or voltage regulator, a couple of horns that were on the car, the fuel line from the petrol tank, and then the tank itself, and the filler cap and neck. And I'm removing it a little bit gingerly here because there was still a little bit of fuel left in the bottom. I didn't quite do a good enough job of draining it all. This is just peering up as a reminder to remove the 2 handbrake cables, to pull those through, and then lastly just to remove the rear brake cable fitting, otherwise they snag between the chassis and the body.